In this class we're going to explain how the price of products is determined in the market. We're going to look at different aspects to the market, supply and demand, and see how both of those come together to determine the price. If we place the demand and supply curves on the same diagram, then the axes are the same. On the vertical axis we'll have the price of the product, and on the horizontal axis we have the quantity demanded. So the axes for the supply curve and the demand curve are the same, so we can use the same two curves, supply and demand, on the same diagram. This will enable us to determine how the price comes about. So there are the axes. On the vertical we have the price per unit, and on the horizontal the quantity demanded or the quantity supplied per unit of time. In other words, the quantity demanded or supplied per week, per month, per year, or whatever the time period is. Now, these axes are the same, as I said, for demand and for supply. So if we insert the demand curve is downward sloping. In other words, as the price falls, we demand more. And that's a typical demand curve in economics. The supply curve tends to be upward sloping. As the price rises, producers have more incentive to supply the good, so the supply increases. And where the two cross, we call it the equilibrium. That's the point at which supply and demand are balanced. In this case it's PE, E for equilibrium, so the equilibrium price, PE, and the equilibrium quantity demanded and supplied, QE. Let's take a situation where the price is above the equilibrium. Let's say at this point P1. Now at this point the demand is Q1 and the supply is Q2. In other words, at the price of P1, supply is greater than demand. If supply is greater than demand, then the producers need to dispose of the extra production. They're overproducing. They're producing too much. The market has not taken it. The consumers are only demanding Q1 and the producers are producing Q2. In order to dispose of the extra production, they need to cut the price. So the price must fall from P1. Now, the surplus production will therefore be reduced. As the price falls, the difference between what is demanded and what is supplied will be reduced. So really what we're doing is we're heading towards this equilibrium, P and Q. The price will be continuously cut by the producers to try and sell off the extra stock until the equilibrium price comes about. Now as the price falls, the demand will have increased from Q1 to Q, and the amount that the producers are making and putting on the market will fall from Q2 down to Q. So two things are happening here. One, the demand is expanding because the price is falling, and because the price is falling, the supply is also being restricted. Both of these acting together leads us down to the equilibrium price. We can do exactly the same thing for a price of P2 where there's a shortage. In this case, the demand is greater than the supply. At P2, the consumers want a lot of this good and the suppliers are only supplying a small amount. It's not very profitable, so the suppliers are only supplying, let's say, Q3, whereas the demand is Q4. The difference between the two is the shortage. Now if there's a shortage, the consumers will bid up the price because the consumers want it. So they will bid up the price, and this in effect will lead to, as the price rises, it'll lead to a cutback in demand. As the price rises, the demand will fall, the goods becoming more expensive. But also as the price rises, the supply will increase. Producers will put more on the market because it's more profitable to make this particular product. Again, the whole thing is moving towards the equilibrium. So when we have a surplus or a shortage, forces come into play automatically, pushing the market towards the equilibrium. So surplus is when the price is greater than P, and shortages when the price is below P. When the price is P, we call it the equilibrium. That's the balance point, where the market is exactly balanced. And many people believe that all markets come into equilibrium. There are forces in the markets that push them towards the equilibrium. Of course, at any one moment in time, they may not be in equilibrium, but the forces leading to an equilibrium are always in play. Now, let's see what happens if the demand curve was to shift outwards. Now, this could happen because, for example, income's increased. So people have more income to spend on the good, or because tastes have moved in favour of the good, people want more of it, it's more fashionable. So for whatever reason, the demand curve has moved, in this case, out to the right, out to D1, D1. Now if that's the case, then at the existing equilibrium price of P, there is now an excess demand. It's as if the old demand curve, DD, no longer exists, because the new demand curve, D1, D1, now is in play. So at the price P, there is now excess demand. In other words, at the price P, there is a shortage, and the shortage is equal to the difference between Q3 and QE. If there's a shortage, the price will be bid upwards. And as the price is bid upwards, the demand will be cut back and the supply will increase. So that the new equilibrium will be at P1 QNE. QNE, new equilibrium. So there will be a new price and quantity, which are the equilibrium prices, price and quantity, P1 and QNE. So that is the new equilibrium. Let's now just have a look at the, in this case, the supply curve has remained constant, demand increases and the price rises, and we have a new equilibrium. The supply curve could also move. Let's say the supply curve moved to S new, supply curve, the new supply curve. This could happen because raw materials have become more expensive, or imports have become more expensive, or whatever, labour has become more expensive. So with the new supply curve at the price P, there is now there's now market forces in play leading to an increase in price. The demand curve is DD and the supply curve is S new. So there is now an excess demand for the good. An excess demand will lead to an increase in the price because there is a shortage at the existing price of P. The shortage means that a new equilibrium will eventually emerge, which is at P1 and QNE. The price has increased and the quantity has been reduced, which makes sense. If the price of raw materials increases, we'd expect the price of the product to increase, and we'd expect less of it to be on the market. We could also use this approach of supply and demand to analyse different pricing policies. For example, let's say that the government said that there was a minimum price, P min, which was equal to there. If that's the case, then the supply curve is greater than the demand at P min, so there's excess supply. For that to be a permanent feature, for P min to be the permanent feature, the new supply curve will have to be S new. In other words, the supply curve would have to shift upwards. If there is a minimum price, then the price would increase from P to P min, and the quantity on the market would be reduced, which again accords with what we would expect. If the government was to set a minimum price for something, there may be less of it available because producers find it more difficult to meet those restrictions. Let's have a look at minimum wages, for example. Here's on the vertical axis the wages per hour, W, and on the horizontal axis, the QT in this case, are hours worked per month. And here's the supply and demand, so we have an equilibrium wage. Now, if the minimum wage is W1, then we are going to have unemployment. The government forces up the wage to W1. The producers will cut back on the number of workers they require, and also more people will want work because now it's more in their interest to work because the wage has gone up. The difference between the number of workers on the market and what the employers want is unemployment. So by increasing the minimum wage, unemployment could result. Okay, so the difference as the wage rises, the precise level of unemployment could be measured by G and E, because the supply is greater than the demand. You could also have a look at a maximum price policy. Let's say the government said no one's allowed to charge more than P1 for a particular good. Now in this case, the demand is greater than the supply, so there's going to be excess demand equal to the difference between those 2 points is indicated. So the excess demand is OG minus OE. The price can't rise, so the excess demand remains. And what would probably happen in that case is that there would be a black market for the good. Consumers would buy the product at P1 and then sell it amongst themselves for a higher price, so that a new equilibrium would emerge. And also you might have producers stepping up production to try and to meet the demand as well. So the price, even though the price is fixed, the official price is fixed at P1, there might be a non-official price, a market price, not condoned by the government perhaps, but one emerging nonetheless, of PE. So the government policy there may not have been effective. Now, we can also have a look at a tax, the incidence of a tax here. If the government puts a tax on a product, it's the same as increasing the price of raw materials, or the same as increasing the costs of the product. The tax is like an increase in the costs. So in this case, the tax T has the effect of moving the supply curve to S1. That means that the price would rise and the quantity would fall. So it's the price plus the tax. The consumers would pay more because previously the consumers were paying PE, now they're paying PE plus T. So the consumers are paying more for it. But in addition to that, in the past, if the quantity was QE plus T, then the producers would have received P1. That was the old supply curve. So the producers would have got P1, and the price would have been PE. So now, in effect, the producers are paying some of the increase in the taxes, as indicated in the diagram, and the consumers are paying some more. So in other words, the total tax, T, that the government receives, part of it is being paid by the producers and part is being paid by the consumers. The precise amount paid by each will depend on how sensitive the market is to the increase in the tax. Now let's have a look at an assessment of the market. The market answers various questions. It says it answers the question what should be produced. Well, what should be produced is what is demanded. So the what should be produced is what is demanded and what is capable of production. And the market solves that automatically. How should it be produced? What technology should be used? Well, the most efficient, the most cost-saving. And again, the market will put pressure on the producers to ensure that that's kept at a minimum. So it's argued that the market will lead to efficiency. Next, who should receive the output? Well, this is more contentious. You could say that people who need the product should receive it. But in fact, according to this analysis, it's the people who can afford it will receive it. The people who can't afford it won't receive it. That's the nature of the market. Now there are some problems with the market system. So let's have a look at those briefly. First of all, the distribution of income over time can change. In other words, some people can become very rich over time and some people can become quite poor. And the market will not correct for this. The market might produce dangerous goods. There might be a market for explosives or guns or weapons or whatever. So the market would produce it. If there is a demand, the market presumably would just produce it. It might produce undesirable goods, for example drugs or harmful products. If there's a demand, there's an incentive in the market to produce it. It might lead to production, all sorts of production, in a way which ignores health and safety regulations. So workers are working in dangerous environments, all in the interest of keeping costs down and increasing profits. Competition, which is meant to keep the price of the product down, may become less over time as companies buy out each other and merge. And eventually you might only just get one or two companies, or perhaps just one company, which we'd call a monopoly. And if we depend on that product, then that one company could charge a very high price. And finally, there are situations which we call market failure, situations where the market can't produce the good. The defence forces or law and order. It's very difficult for the government to put these into the private hands, into the market production. These are normally produced out of taxpayers' money. So the markets can fail. In fact, we'll see in different classes that the markets can fail for a variety of reasons, not just certain products that are produced by taxpayers' funds, which we call public goods, but sometimes the markets may produce what we call externalities, external effects, which may be undesirable. For example, pollution. Markets can also fail because of bad information. If consumers don't have the appropriate information, the markets could also fail. So those are some of the factors that we need to take into account when we consider the market situation. Okay, that's a brief overview of supply, demand, the market, and some of the ways in which the market can operate. I hope that was useful. Thank you for watching.